Hey, welcome to Roleplay Cafe. It's Dale here in the wee hours. Apologize for the road to rubber noise, if any. It permeates your speakers. But I'm going to speak on perspective. Is my hand bigger than my head? Maybe so with the card I'm going to deal. All right. I'm going to speak about where I find myself comfortably seated within the hobby. It's more so, to my mind, based on my, I wouldn't necessarily say preference, and it is preferential, but there is to me, a large degree of intuitive acceptance and understanding of the hobby, especially now. I think when the hobby was first introduced to me, even though we role-played our character to a small degree, the game at large was a mechanistic game. A game of warfare, and I'm talking about D&D, on the individual level, inside of a platoon or a group of mercenaries, what have you. There was a time in particular where we had someone join the party that was wanting to play, or that did in fact play from a more of a characterization. I don't know if the character that they were exhibiting was conscious and aware, but rather a characterization of a player type. So it was a little bit extravagant or a little bit over the top, and it ran at odds to how we were used to playing, which was very much min-maxing, get to the town, go straight to the weapon shop or what have you, start resource managing, start trying to maximize your character. Everybody piles up. Well, he was off to the bar, right? And we'd usually burn the whole town down afterwards, right? So it felt like we was wrangling cats, and he was the biggest one of all. Not the NPCs we were up against, not the main baddie, but it threw a bit of a monkey wrench into where we at the time were comfortable with playing. And I've always presumed from that position that was how most people played, and then that you had someone who would be more akin to disruption, antics, not playing for the benefit but for the detriment of the party. So whenever he would join, usually you have these types which at first blush you may think, they're just the hobo with a shotgun, that was real. He didn't play that way. He played seriously, but like I said, he was off to the bar, and to see what trouble he could get into carousing. He would force the DM's hand and play acting this out, and then the DM would jump back to us as we were plotting and planning, while side-eyeing his character, and we could see when the shoe was dropped and the pin was dropped, and then it would cause disruption, and then we would have to come to his rescue. So that's the way I was used to playing. Now, it wasn't until years later, when specifically with Jason Graham, the one and only, that I incurred more activity toward not just characterization or playing in a character, but playing as the character first and foremost, as opposed to weighing and measuring your mechanical options. I thought it was interesting. I've had a story before of where he said he had a little epiphany when his brother played a spy game and then did something with full agency as the character in a situation, and it was a scramble to see if the rules would allow it. When it did allow it, it was just taking the guy in the elevator and pulling the gun on him and throwing him up against the wall and saying whatever. Now, what is this allowed? What do you do with this? And this breaks into, the role play back and forth and GM Fiat and whatever, but it cracked open that door, I believe, and I can't speak for him directly, but to me, seemingly, from his description, it cracked open that door of possibilities. At least it did for me when I heard it. So it harkened back to why that person I mentioned in our group would go to the bar rather than immediately to the inn like we were and to the store and do our shopping. That's what we use towns for. So it hadn't occurred to us other than to be a saboteur of why someone would do this. But as a character, you're out on the road, you come into town, you've been gone for a while, what do you think would happen? So you carouse. Instead of shopping, he was doing that some, which made sense. Maybe it breathed a little more life into the character for me, that you could do that and express that. Now you could go down that rabbit hole and then, have, as Jason said when we did our AP, our actual play of the French resistance fighters, with me being the supposed Swiss spy, our accountant, lawyer, excuse me, why? Technical difficulties do abound. Nevertheless, that was there. Now, I think to go back, whenever I was playing, I recall working at a job side by side with a guy. We was on something called the hang line, hanging toolboxes to be painted. And so I said, you ever play D&D? Nah. So then I started playing with him. It was very much in the method of me just describing everything and him saying go left, go right, or I do this, and being enthralled by what was happening. He used to bug me to continually just feed him with stories to avert boredom. Where am I today? What am I doing? So I would do that. But I remember specifically that the mechanics, all I did was say, he's got a 30% chance here, give me a number. I would go 4, 5, 6. Give me a number from 1 to 10. He'd say 7. Yeah, you missed. Right? That's as simple as I would do it. Later on, when we was playing on the forums, I needed a narrative prompt to keep the written text flowing, so I did something similar. Everyone was using D&D. They stuck with a D20. They compiled their positive attributes as opposed to negative and gave me the differential. I compared differentials and made a differential for that, and then added that differential to a positive or negative on a D20, down the middle, 50-50. And then if you got one more than him, then all of a sudden you had 55% chance and he had 45% chance. I just rolled the dice, found out what it prompted, and then we narratively moved that direction. So to me, the mechanics had always been a secondary element, just a decision maker when you distilled them down and boiled them down to their essence, as was represented with how I was doing this. Now this tracked with what Jason was illuminating, and the rest of the guys. You know, everybody plays in character, but it was illuminating as we played. At least for me, it was more of a new concept. It was the moment. Okay, now I'm not just supposed to tell a story while somebody responds in kind so much as we have a shared narrative dialogue, not a monologue with a listener that's prompting me here or there, with the die rolls facilitating the prompt. It was back and forth. So you have to go down that rabbit hole sometimes to have discussions and conversations as you play in character, as character, primarily sometimes. The in character, as character point needs to be moderated. I call it a rabbit hole because you could go down that rabbit hole. The reason to me D&D was made like it was because it can accomplish and more people at the table that kind of play. So when you're playing that way, you don't have time to go down conversational rabbit holes while everybody sits around and wait. They sit around and wait for mechanics to kick in, but they won't wait for those long dialogues, right? And that could happen. Like in single player, we went 30 minutes. What if you had 3 guys or 3 people sitting around the table playing in that, in that capacity? It's going to cause slowdown. So I think optimally, when you're playing in character, as character, 3 is about, to me, the maximum, even though I've did it with Dark Age of Man with like 6 people at the table at a convention. And it worked fine. They folded in as their character more readily than I previously, and whenever I started playing, as my examples entailed. It was natural. That's why I'll state that at the onset, when I played the game, I understood it as a game and mechanics. However, the capacity for people to sit around and pretend like we've all did, even when we were kids, is there. So it's not a hard ask to have people just play in character, as a character, and pretend to be that character. It just has to be kept with certain understandings and restrictions, which I think that just social boundaries would dictate. You yield to someone. You don't want to overspeak. It's his turn, their turn. If the conversation is engaging, everybody's kind of cued in and listening. This is a lot of proof in the pudding for me with what we did with Dark Age of Man and what I anticipated and designed myself specifically. We cultivated that, even no initiative. The mechanics work to facilitate and uphold no initiative. Social agreements and norms come into effect. You yield to other people to speak. When you do, you play with respect to each other in the party. So all that stuff doesn't need to be monitored and guideline, and there's no guide rail, so to speak, right? So the rules in the game should put an overall um, situation where people find themselves, or players find themselves. Again, don't worry, I'm not hurt, as it were. Hope you're not either. That was quite the tumble we took together. But the rule system, as it were, yes, and I'm having to prop it up because my cell phone holder is broken on one side now, so got to get another one. Unfortunately, that happened yesterday. So the system sets up the boundaries for play, but a natural, intuitive boundary. And you can trust the players stay within that boundary and conduct themselves life-wise in respect to each other. Even the agreed upon level of legitimate buy-in and realism at the table. So no one is going to try to, when you're in the spotlight, when it's your turn to act, and it's integral to keeping the current level of a believability, you naturally rise to that occasion. And I haven't seen it broken yet, but there's a natural intuit that people adhere to whenever they're playing, to make sure that they stay in the same fiction or the same genre, the same understanding and believability that that's almost an unspokenly agreed upon, or that the setting may or genre or time period may may ask you to do. So every table is a little bit different, and every table has an understanding and represents that. So it's not really, I don't see where that itself requires an abundance of rules, when you can lean on that social contract. And people are conditioned to respond and act and react in that way toward each other. So that's taken care of. And you have, like I said, there may be a need in Darkage Man when we set the random seeds out. Now, this is a little bit something I noticed differently, because Jason was he would do a negative and a odd and an even roll to find out if complications would occur whenever I prompted, as the character, a different direction. Right? Is it going to be complicated? Is it not? Which is brilliant. One thing, when we go into a 30-minute conversation, if you have with Darkage Man, you do it by feel. I think both of those techniques are beneficial in their own way. Darkage Man did allow for, if there's a conversation, rolling the die and finding out if something does interpose in between that conversation, whether it adds to the conversation and lightens in a certain degree, or whether there's an interruption of the conversation to move the situation forward. You always have to have momentum in a game. Momentum. Nobody's there for, subtle. There's minutia that's subtle there, like when my character Nook was at the table and looked down at the names, couldn't read them, and then that allowed it to be outstanding role play when David just looked at me and said, as his new character, it's just a couple of martyrs, referencing his old character. And Nook didn't know what a martyr was, so he just straightened up and smiled. That is telling. That's subtly complex, it's enriching to the character experience, you don't want to clip those off. You can have dialogues with all the characters, with the GM or presenter being an NPC, that are beautiful moments. But you don't let those moments overstay their welcome, similar to this video. So you have to have something that moves the scene forward into another thing, right? So that's essentially what I saw that the random seeds do. They can prompt that. They're not keyed on a certain time period, like exactly when we move from a scene, then you roll to see if the next scene could be complicated, which is still great. But I noticed that small difference, at least to me. Now, I didn't know Jason was doing this at all, which I thought was awesome. You know, I thought he could have just been kind of fiat. I felt like something was different. He wasn't just making random choices. I'd hear a little die drop. I felt like something was going on. I just didn't know fully until he said that afterwards, which I think that can be and should be, most probably, it's very intriguing to me, worked into Space Age of Man as well. But I also want to keep the dialogues to a point to where and the scenes transitional from one to the other to keep momentum going. Not overstaying his welcome with any in particular player or character, and moving on to the next. If it's important, if it is the conversation itself is tracking and gaining ground and being productive, but when that productivity wanes, there needs to be something that triggers it. And usually in Dark Age of Man, that's when you roll, right? So you kind of go by feel from that. All in all, though, the way I feel myself in a good, happy, safe place of play is when I'm playing a character against circumstances. Nowadays, my mind goes further from anything that has to do with mechanics. You'll notice, well, the AP was messed up, but during the last game when I was playing Nook, it's like I only had 6 HP and I'm level 3. I could have cared less. I mean, to be honest with you, if I stayed level 1 through this whole, I am notoriously bad of not leveling up my characters. That's not what I'm there for, you know, not to get easy. You say, well, today you're facing harder creatures. And to me, it's just a balancing act, you know. It was like when you're playing one of these mobile games or any other game where you level up, and then remember back in the day, you would just have the same creature, it'd just be a different color and it would be a harder version. You're doing the same thing. It's just matching what you're doing. So it's, it's totally illusionary to me that like you're doing more. Maybe it could be in the storyline where something more dangerous approaches and affects, and that's great. Mechanically, it's just an adjustment where you step up and you're dealing with more, you know, epic creatures, which I get it. And if you want to be there and, you know, weather the storm, be more effective, then you add more HP. But to me, you know, I don't know. I guess I've always played just basic D&D where I was stuck at level 3 and below for the vast majority of my career. And the longest played character I had, Larazor, just reached level 7. And he didn't even die in battle. He died because they killed him off in a session that I didn't make. Because, yeah. But no harm, no foul. It's been years ago, you know. But anyway, it's good times. I just find myself to where I just want to be facing things that I have to, as a character, contend with myself as the character, which is always interesting. His own personal existential crisis, the worldview he has, what he's grappling with, to make me come into more understanding about potentially humanity and look outside, look beyond my own nose as a person, and look from their perspective, that being one, as they're dealing with circumstances in life that could crop up or in pseudo life, whether it's a fantasy realm or sci-fi realm or what have you. That's the intriguing part to me. The rest of it is accoutrement. It's peripheral on the side. It's, it's cool. I like to, that's one thing, if I'm using gear or whatever, I like to make it meaningful, purposeful, instead of just random. Because if I'm just tagging on something as there, but I like to feel like the gear that I have will be needed. If I'm going to climb a mountain, then I need to find a grappling hook and enough rope and make sure I have it. So that resource management thing, to me, it has to be tangible. It has to be real and meaningful, more so for me to be fully engaged in it. But anyway, I could go on and on and on, of course, but I've got to get into the store, and I'll see you guys later. Take care of yourselves, all right? Bye-bye.